Hey, what's going on, everyone? So I'll give it like a minute or two for people to come in, and then we'll go from there. Just going to kind of sip on my coffee today, organic, of course. All right. So, Jason, what is up? Long time no see, man. Long time no hear. We got to catch up over a phone call one of these days. Hope everything is going well. In the live today, we'll be talking about like ideal or how to even develop like very aesthetically appealing abs and ideal exercises you should do for those abs and stuff of that sort. Because oftentimes a lot of people they just overcomplicate it too much. So in this live, I just want to really simplify it and get down to the basics of how to just create aesthetically appealing abs. And let's just start with Bob. Good to see you. Let's just start with the most important thing for app development, as you guys probably heard 1,005 times online. We're just going to go over the basic stuff first, which is important to understand. James, good to see you. And that's the most important thing for app development, is just having like a lower body fat percentage. Now, what kind of body fat percentage are you looking at for males? It really depends from person to person in terms of the shape of your torso and how the rest of your body is shaped. But a general idea, and it also depends on how kind of like ripped you want to be. So do you want just a flat midsection without any like protruding body fat? Do you want like just definition on the upper four abs, in the rectus abdominis area? Do you want, just your love handles to be gone or stuff of that sort? And that all basically dictates how low your body fat percentage should be. So I would say if you want like a firm, trim midsection without any love handles or kind of like a protruding, gut in the front of your pants, like protruding in front of your belt line, for example, in particular when you're sitting down. For males, you're looking at probably being around 12%, 12 to 10% or so. The average male, just to give you an idea, is about 25% or 27%. So the idea is like 20% is overweight considered for males, roughly given your age, et cetera, et cetera. 25% is considered, 25% and over is considered obese, and then 30% and over is like morbidly obese, basically. So you want to be operating, for the most part, around 12% or so. Over the years, I've actually been able to get away with being around 15% body fat, but in that case, you have to like really flex your abs very, very hard for them to be able to be seen. So in terms of just kind of like visually being able to see the abs, et cetera, probably 12% is where you want to be. And if you want to get like super, super ripped to the point of where your abs kind of look like they have abs, you definitely need to be like 8, 7, 6% body fat or something of that sort. And then it's kind of also like arguable whether being that lean and ripped is healthy for you long term, and also if it's just it's just the lifestyle you want to live. So obviously your nutrition is going to be on point. Your nutrition would have to be on point pretty much all year round if you're walking around at like 7% body fat all year round. And if it's your thing, that's totally okay. But if it's not, then just understand kind of like what you're losing in terms of like what you're gaining as well. So the main thing is just having low body fat percentage, low being defined as 12% or below. Ideally, if you want to get really ripped, like 10% or below. Gabriel, good to see you. Where that is dependent on you. And one thing you can do to determine where your body fat is currently is get a DEXA scan. It's spelled DEXA scan. I'm pretty sure if you Googled it, you'll find, especially if you're living in a city, you'll find like a million areas that offer this kind of service. Typically, it ranges between like 100 to 150 bucks. But the basic idea is they put you kind of in this scan. Gabriel, good to see you. Hope all is well. In this scan, and they basically scan your body and give you like a very accurate reading of your body fat percentage, your bone density, any kind of discrepancies between your appendages, like your arms, if one is way heavier than the other, stuff like that. And they give you like a whole bunch of other cool analytics. Do you have to get it done all the time? No. But it is cool to get it done at least once in your life and just see where you're at, and then kind of compare yourself to the base level there. So Generally speaking, with aesthetics, I mean, it's not totally necessary to know your body fat. You can simply, if you're trying to save money, look in the mirror and just ask yourself, am I as lean as I would like to be, or is my midsection as defined as I would like to be? And if it's not, you basically have one solution, and that's just to continue to decrease your body fat percentage, which we spoke about on a lot of other videos, so I'm not going to cover it extensively here. But the general idea from a nutrition perspective, you want to focus on, how many calories you're getting in. So remember, it's impossible for your body to gain body fat in a true caloric deficit. If it were possible for your body to actually gain body fat in a deficit, you shouldn't have to be worried about getting lost in the forest or stuff of that sort, because you're never going to starve to death. And how silly does that sound, So the general idea is you definitely want to be in a deficit. How steep that deficit is, some people would argue a couple of different numbers. I would say, like 500 is a good place to start based on your activity level, your current base metabolism, your goals, how intense you are in the gym, your personality type, what type of foods you're eating, which leads into our next question. From a nutrition perspective, another important variable is how you basically distribute your macronutrients. How many grams of protein do you have? How many grams of fat? How many grams of carbs? And that will vary from individual to individual depending on their training style, their genetic makeup as well, what part of their program they're into. Oftentimes, like especially if you're doing an undulating periodization program, you have like an accumulation phase and an intensification phase. Depending on which of those phases you're in, could also alter the ideal ratios you should have. And then a third variable to consider is also the type of sourcing you do. How are you sourcing those macronutrients and inevitably those calories? Are you getting those calories from McDonald's, for example, or are you getting those calories from like pasture-raised meats and at least USDA organic certified like produce at the supermarket? So there's all three of those variables are, I would say, equally important, and all three of them need to be attended to not only optimize your fat loss goal, but also like optimize your health and well-being and your skin complexion, etc., etc. It's not all calories, it's not all macros, it's not all sourcing, it's all three of those all at one time if you want to get the best results. And then there's also obviously the more subjective, more rather variable thing to consider in terms of a person's gut health. Sometimes people are intolerable to high amounts of fiber. Sometimes getting a lot more fiber in their diet actually helps people with their gut issues. Eating one type of food helps, makes someone healthy and feel great, while that next person next to them eats that same exact food and has constipation or IBS issues, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those are important to consider, but the general idea is you want to have a lower body fat range. And oftentimes, if even a lot of people on this conversation, in this chat here, if you get your body fat down to, I guarantee you, like around 10%, even without training abs, a lot of you will already have six-pack abs, or like, especially if you flex really hard, maybe not unflex, but especially if you're flexing really hard, at that body fat percentage, for sure, you will have very good definition on your like external obliques, these things, very good definition on your serratus interior, which are these things near your ribs. For sure, good definition in your rectus abdominis, which is what most people are kind of after. They're after kind of like those six-pack abs look. And also you'll have actually like a lot of definition in this muscle in your back, your lower back, called the quadratus lumborum. So it's your very lower back, and oftentimes when your body fat gets low enough, you start seeing like striations, and it kind of looks like a Christmas tree. So that's cool as well. And at 10%, for those of you guys stubborn with those stubborn love handles, at 10% body fat, for sure it will be gone for most of you. Some of you may need to dip a little bit lower at most, and for sure it will be like just very flat at that point. So you won't have to deal with, those love handles protruding from your shirt and having to deal with that at the beach or wherever, social situations, et cetera, et cetera. That's probably one of the most common complaints I get from people that come into coaching programs. They just hate their kind of like love handles for the most part, or that kind of protruding muffin top type of look, especially if you're wearing a lot of business type of outfits that require like a belt. It kind of tends to protrude out, and that makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable. So just remember, with abs, it's all about abs visually. I'm not talking about performance here. It's all about having a low body fat percentage. That's it. And that's really it. Don't be confused by anything else anyone says. That's really it. If you just dial your body fat down enough, I guarantee you, without even training your abs, although I would recommend you do that, you will have very defined and ripped abs. There is the genetic variable. Some people just won't have those deep chiseled valleys, for example, because generally speaking, that's more genetic space, and you really wouldn't know if you are in that category or not until you dial your body fat percentage down enough. So I would recommend get down to 10, see where you're at. If you're still not having a lot of definition in your abs, like what I would tell clients is maybe get down to 7%, and see where you're at. And for sure, like at 7%, you'll know for sure if you have the genetic potential for like great ab development and all that stuff. So that's it. That's the mystery. You just need to bring your fat down, body fat down enough. There is no special like exercise you should be doing, or definitely stay away, I would say, from those fat loss pills. It's not necessary. And I've never used them. I've never had any of my clients use them. You can see a lot of my clients are looking very ripped after, the 4 to 5 months on the coaching program. They never use fat loss pills. You literally just need to bring your body fat down, mainly, especially when you take self-sabotage away from the equation, mainly through proper dieting and lifestyle factors. Like sleeping well would obviously benefit you a tremendous amount, not only aesthetically, but also just your overall quality of life, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a myriad of other variables, but just touching on a few. Now, I do get a lot of questions, people asking me like, what type of workout should I do for ideal abs? And once again, there is no like ideal workout. It's very tough for me to give anyone any advice unless I particularly have that person directly in front of me and know their goals. So for example, there are some general rules which I'll cover in a second, but for example, let's say you have two people, like they're twins. Let's even say they're twins, but one has, like a posterior lateral disc bulge in their lower back, and another one has an anterior disc bulge in their lower back, in the same exact portion of their lower back. Let's say the L4 region, intervertebral disc, okay? So the advice in terms of like what ab exercises they should do is going to be completely different, although let's just say their goals are exactly the same, because the one with the posterior disc bulge, meaning the one that's poking out of their back, which is very, very common and pretty much, I don't know the exact percentage, but like probably 80% of people develop some type of posterior disc bulge somewhere down their spine within their lifetime, many of which don't have symptoms at all. Sumer, good to see you. Hope your first week went well. Let me know how it's gone. Pat, good to see you as well. And so the person with the posterior disc bulge, I mean, it depends on their stage of healing and how early and how severe that disc bulge is. So like, for example, 1 millimeter, let's say it's poking away from the nerve root, it's not going to be a problem, but like 6 millimeters that's poking directly into the nerve root could most likely cause a problem, but maybe not. We don't know any of that until we establish like a very in-depth mechanical assessment, especially of the spine, that tests for different ranges of motion and what they're tolerant and intolerant for, and then you can kind of customize a program based on that. But what I'm saying here is, let's say the twin with the posterior disc bulge, it would be probably a terrible idea for him to do decline sit-ups where your hips are locked, especially, for example, or Russian twists, stuff of that sort. But with the other twin that has an anterior disc bulge, it's coming out in front of his body, which is more rare, but it happens. That person would be most likely flexion intolerant. So if he's, extension intolerant. So if he's extending, that would, let's say, possibly cause him pain, okay? Because it protrudes the nucleus material anteriorly. And that could poke out and cause him pain, or if there's an end plate fracture, It could just cause pain from having a lot of compressive penalties, such as really even flexing the abs or sneezing very hard, especially doing a deadlift. If a person is compression intolerant, especially with like an end plate fracture, even doing the deadlift correctly doesn't guarantee that they won't be in pain, because their biological tipping point is fairly low from that injury. And it's easy to surpass that even through like flexing the abs. And I'm pretty sure maybe some of you that have had a back injury in the past, you've experienced probably like sneezing really hard, and even that kind of slightly hurts, or even possibly hurts your lower back quite a bit. So just to give you an idea of some people could just be compression intolerant, and telling them to do the exercise correctly is not enough until you desensitize the area enough for them to actually go back and do it safely. So you can see here that the advice would change. So like, for example, like I mentioned, the person with the posterior disc bulge, will be a bad idea for them to do a decline sit-up or a sit-up off the floor, or like a Russian twist most likely. But the anterior protrusion twin, probably a Superman would be a bad idea. The one where you're kind of moving your feet and arms out like that while you lay facing down towards the ground will be a bad idea probably from that person. So as you can see, there's a lot of variability, and that's why you also have to be careful, including my info. I'm not excluding myself from this. You have to be careful with following online advice, or even buying a book and following advice in a book, even from a credible person, because they never met you at the end of the day. And it's really tough. I've written 2 books, and it's just really tough to write a book in a way that communicates to everyone, because once again, you might have a general idea of your audience base, but there's so much variability with even a niche audience that it's impossible to write a book to speak directly to that person and directly to their problem without knowing that person exactly. And it's the same with social media influencers. Oftentimes, even if the person's intention is good, and even if they are competent, I would just be very, very careful with listening to their advice, because you could easily take it out of context. It might be good advice, but you can take it out of context and use it incorrectly. And oftentimes, remember, it's not like what you do, but how you do it too. So application is also very, very important. That's just like knowing the right thing to do. And oftentimes application is where that wisdom and a lot of years of clinical experience will take. So for example, I could give you a car manual on how to construct a car from scratch. Literally all the answers are actually there, but how many of you, I know I wouldn't, how many of you would be able to put that car together from scratch? Know where to source the parts, if the parts are legitimate, know where to get the tools, are you going to be able to afford the tools, where to have the space to construct the car, are you going to be able to also invest the time necessary to actually read through the book in detail and be able to put everything together, et cetera, et cetera. And a car is far more straightforward and far more basic than the human body and the human mind. So for example, we still don't even know, even the brightest scientists in the world still don't even know, and there's a lot of argument about even why human consciousness forms or how it forms. And human consciousness is what gives us our life experience of pretty much everything, and we don't even know that. So just to give you an idea of how complicated mental and physical health is as compared to engineering of a car, for instance, for example. So a lot of people say like, oh, it's not rocket science, but really the saying should be like, oh, it's not the human health. It's not like that difficult, because human health is actually like very, very difficult because of a myriad of reasons, but one of the reasons is just the variability. And oftentimes, for example, to make it even more simple, let's say you have those 2 individual twins and both of them are 20 pounds overweight. These are twins. So let me make that clear. These are twins, and both of them are 20 pounds overweight. Oftentimes, the reason for why one gained 20 pounds could be completely different from the reason, the root cause of why another person gained that 20 pounds. So obviously their approach in terms of getting to the etiology of why that happened would be completely different. So their program would be completely different. Or rather, like on the surface, it looks like these 2 people are exactly the same. They're twins and they're both 20 pounds overweight. They're exactly the same age. you would think like, well, the approach should be the same because they're the same client on the surface. But if you're getting to the etiology of why one gained 20 pounds and why another person gained 20 pounds, it's more times than not, meaning like 99% is different. 99% of the time it is different. The reasons for gaining that weight is different, so the solution needs to be different as well. So there's my quick little rant on in terms of just listening to people out of context. And it's very important. A lot of people get this sense of false hope by, getting free content online or stuff of that sort. And then they try it and they're like, well, it's not working. Simply most likely because of that. The content provider, even if they are very intelligent, just never met you, so they don't know your specific circumstance. And obviously nature is a novelty generator, and there are no two people that are the same, no two grains of sand that are the same, or even droplets of water that are the same. So all approaches need to be different and tailored for that specific individual at that specific point in their life, because also the method changes as the person ages as well, etc., etc. So in terms of exercises, these are just some exercises I have clients to do. Once again, it varies from person to person. I can't give you exact answers. It just all depends on what the person is looking for. But a general theme is you want to keep it like very basic. Don't overcomplicate it. You don't need to do anything like matrix level, like gymnastics type of stuff just to build abs. Like for example, as you guys see, I kind of post my progressions pretty often in the group, and I have very defined abs, but I don't do anything crazy. I just work abs twice a week for just 3 to 4 sets per session of like 10 to 20 reps or something like that. My go-to exercises are like dead bugs. If you do them right, they are actually very difficult, especially if you superset the dead bug with like a leg raise type of superset, leg and arm raise type of superset. Stir the pots are very great exercises that integrate the whole entire core instead of isolate, which is important too, because you have to remember your core is composed of a lot of different muscles. You got your internal, external oblique, transverse, rectus abdominis, quadratus lumborum, multi-ifidi, I would say the pelvic floor muscles, glutes, and even your lats, all part of basically like what's referred to as AKA the core. And all those muscles need to work in synchrony with one another, each providing aid to help stabilize the spine from moving under load, because you have to remember your spine has 2 jobs. It needs to be very flexible, but it also needs to be able to needs to be able to bear a lot of load and not have your spine collapse. So for example, if you didn't have any of those muscles and you just tested the compressive penalties on the spine itself, it wouldn't be able to bear that much load. I think just even 10 pounds or 20 pounds would collapse the spine, but many of you are at least able to do the 45-pound bar no problem. So it's obviously not the spine that's bearing that load, although the vertebrae and the discs do help distribute axial loading through the spine. It's really just the active tissue, meaning all those muscles you mentioned, and the passive tissue, a lot of the ligaments going around that area, also the intervertebral discs that help stabilize the spine and hold it in place. Like for example, there are a lot of posterior elements in the back of the back, and if they weren't there, you'd simply be able to kind of like rotate. Or if they weren't there and also, the ligaments weren't there, you'll be able to kind of like rotate all the way around like some type of person in like the poltergeist or something like that. So everything has a place and time, and there are a lot of intricate details of the core. I would say it's probably the most complicated area of the body as well. And it's usually the area that when pathologies start arising in that area, you will get oftentimes pathologies in the neck, pathologies in the shoulder, pathologies in the knee as well. And unless it's a direct injury, like a car accident, or like with the knee, you fell from a bike and hit it really hard on the concrete, it most likely has something to do or originates from pathology in the core, which is a long conversation, but most of the time people are sitting for way too long, which creates discrepancy, like too many tight muscles, too many lengthened muscles, and it creates a distortion in posture. And then posture, obviously your state of posture is where movement all originates from. So if you have poor posture, any movement that originates from that poor posture wouldn't be optimized movement as well, and oftentimes could be detrimental. And putting too many penalties for too few rewards that you get in return, and over a lifetime of doing that, it's never, usually most never happens overnight. It's kind of like smoking, but over a lifetime of doing that, you get a lot of nagging joint issues and shoulder issues, and you wonder what's going on. It's like one thing after another. There's so many things that could be going on here, such as gut health, adrenal health, how you manage your central nervous system, mental health as well, etc. Everything contributes a little bit, but I would say one of the most common and recognized patterns is just a poor state of posture, and then all movement originates from that poor state of posture, overly straining and tensing the different joints of the body throughout the person's lifetime. And then it's very obvious why people, develop arthritis, and just they wear down their joints a lot faster than it should happen because they're putting on way too many miles. Just imagine one of your car wheels is kind of like do 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 do. Even if it doesn't pop and it's just like that all the time, imagine how much wear and tear it would put on the rest of the car to have to support, that lagging wheel in the back, etc., etc. So much to go on here, but I kind of went on a tangent. But generally speaking, you want to keep the ab exercises simple, and also I like to actually keep them static. So for example, when you're doing a stir the pot, you can kind of Google this exercise. You'll see the core is straight. It's actually stable and it's not bending and flexing. When you start bending and flexing, especially under load, and especially when your hips are locked in place, that is basically what you have to do to create a disc herniation. Eventually, for some people it might take a long time, for some people it might happen faster. Usually the heavier the load you do, the faster it will happen, and also the thicker your vertebrae and your bones are, the faster it will happen as well, etc., etc. So you want to keep the core static and keep it from excessively flexing and extending under load. So instead of doing like a decline sit-up, for example, I would do a stir the pot, or I would do a dead bug variation, for example. When you're doing wood chops, it's very common for people to twist at the torso but keep their hips locked in place. What you want to do is you want to twist your hips in tandem with the torso, okay? Instead of putting that torsion load on those four intervertebral discs that just wear out over time, and then oftentimes when you have a disc herniation, it kind of pops out. It does cause pain for a decent amount of people, not everyone, but what ends up happening over a longer period of time is disc material protrudes out, and then it kind of sticks out for a while until it's metabolized by the body. And then maybe a few years later, the disc itself gristles over and it creates kind of like a scar in the disc. But the problem is once that nucleus material that's inside the disc protrudes out and is metabolized by the body, you basically lose volume in that disc for the rest of your life, depending on how much of that nucleus material has protruded out. And the problem with that, it could be mitigated with good, proper instruction. And I've helped many clients with severe and debilitating back pain actually be pain-free after a couple of months. And they're had back pain for like freaking forever. So you can teach how to mitigate these stresses and still perform at a high level. But at the end of the day, the disc volume is lost. It's permanent loss. And what could happen is if you're not careful with that, there are the posterior elements like the spinous process, the facets, for example. And once the disc is lost, the vertebrae, the intervertebral disc creates distance between all those posterior elements. And once that height is lost, all of a sudden those posterior elements start crashing into each other and creating arthritic problems many years later. And then it goes to the next disc and kind of repairs itself, or repeats itself rather, and then the next disc, etc., etc. And a person could easily fall into patterns of just a lifetime of back pain when you get into those cycles. Tim, good to see you. Hope all is well. Sebastian, thanks for jumping in as well. And it's very, very common to see those. And then you would have to obviously customize a workout program specifically geared to this person. So it's not so easy to give advice, especially when you don't know the person. Especially a lot of people reach out to me online and they just ask like super random questions, like what do I do? You know, and I'm like, well, there's so many things I have to know before I give you advice, because if I don't know those things and I just kind of give you advice and it doesn't work for you, then you're going to come back to me and say like, oh, your advice sucks. And, well, there's so much work that needs to be done even before creating a program for a client, which is why I spend close to 3 hours assessing a client before I even write out a program for them. And I would say even some people need more than 3 hours. 3 hours sometimes isn't even enough. And that's for like also relatively kind of healthy individuals. Imagine if they're like super messed up. It actually will take much longer to really understand where they're coming from, their personality that created these problems, and what really needs to be done to create like an optimal program and approach to really help this person see their goals through in a predictable manner, because you don't want to be relying on dumb luck at the end of the day. With people, dumb luck sometimes works, of course, but not in the long term from my experience, because you have to know what's going on to be able to understand which variables to manipulate, to be able to make a journey streamlined and predictable. End of story. And to really know that, because of the complexity of human behavior, and oftentimes people come to you in their 40s and 50s already kind of jacked up quite a bit, it does really take at least 3 hours of assessing an individual to really get to the bottom of what they're struggling with and create a resolution and a solution for them. I really don't know how a lot of these MDs do it in 10 to 15 minutes, but maybe that's why a lot of patients aren't getting better. So that's what I would do in terms of the core exercises. Don't overcomplicate it. You don't need to do anything crazy, and no, you don't need to train your abs every single day. Twice a week is way more than enough. Once again, it really depends on your goal. These are just super general tips I give some of my clients. You guys may be different. It depends on your function too. A lot of times people say like you don't even need to train the core directly, but I would say you really do, unless you're lifting extremely heavy and just doing 1 PRs, because obviously if you're doing a very heavy barbell squat or a very heavy barbell deadlift, your core will be engaged a tremendous amount, and that could be enough stimulus to actually create a training stimulus in that core. But then you have to weigh out the risk of like you have to be squatting and deadlifting very, very heavy to get that type of activation, which I wouldn't recommend for a lot of people. It's just not necessary to take on that risk for the type of goals they're trying to achieve, especially if you're already like later on in your life, 60, 70. It's probably not going to be a good idea just doing 1 PRs, personal maxes all the time, okay? If ever, for example. So there's that. Also, just some other tips on when creating like aesthetically appealing abs. Try to view the body as a whole. So remember, the ideal is you want like you want a very thin looking midsection, and every body type is different. Some torsos are very blocky, some torsos are very thin. So you got to know where you're standing, but the general idea is you got to know where your body type is and kind of work around there. So if you're kind of more of like a square, not even a square shape, let's say a rectangular shape. Okay, so let's say your shoulders are as wide as your hips, pretty much. Shoulders are always going to be wider, but let's say your shoulders are as wide as your hip bones. So what I would do for that specific person is I would focus, and it depends on their level of body fat. Let's say they're 20 pounds overweight as well. I would focus on obviously decreasing the 20 pounds of body fat, but also just work tremendously on enhancing the width of the shoulders and the width of the lats and also the height of the traps. Because the traps, although they're a small, overall relative small muscle group as compared to a lot of other muscle groups, especially your glutes, when they're very developed, they give your upper body a very muscular and dense look in the upper portion, especially if you have like a good pec minor development and just overall density in the pec, width in their shoulders. So for example, if a person was 20 pounds overweight and they lost those 20 pounds, they'd probably lose like 3 to 4 inches on their midsection. And at the same time, I would also work on just enhancing the width of their shoulders by about 2 to 3 inches, which you can do want a really good program, especially if the person isn't in their advanced stages of lifting, like their weightlifting age isn't very high. That alone would create a huge visual difference. So imagine your shoulders are like 3 inches wider and your midsection is 3 inches more narrow. All of a sudden, optically, visually, you look like your midsection is like 6 inches smaller. For example, I'm kind of exaggerating here, but you would also work on improving the person's posture. You know, imagine if they're standing with their shoulders down and back instead of hunched forward. All of a sudden, their midsection looks a lot smaller just by improving the person's posture. So that would be something I would work on with the person. Their lat sweep is important too, like this huge muscle in the back here. That's very important to develop because it gives your shoulders a much wider appearance from the front, and it gives your back that kind of cobra look shape from the back as well. So you can imagine if you enhance your shoulders by 2 inches, your lat width by like 2 inches, 3 inches, and shrunk your midsection by 2 inches, 3 inches, all of a sudden your physique looks night and day different as compared to how it was in the beginning. And we haven't even touched on ab exercises. We literally just talked about enhancing the musculature of the rest of the body to create that optical illusion of ideally like an X frame. Because a lot of people talk about like a V frame, but really what you want to aim for, what I feel is the most aesthetically appealing physique is an X frame physique. So you have very wide shoulders, a very narrow midsection, and medium width on your hips. So it's kind of once again like an X, okay? And that medium width on the hips plus the wide width of the shoulders really creates on enhancing that narrowness of the midsection, especially if you're keeping your body fat at like 10 to 12%. You kind of get the mental image of what you're trying to do here. So you can see that's, so you need to focus on like the total picture. You can't just focus on the abs. You can't just focus on fat loss alone. Because for example, especially if you're like in a skinny fat category, ideally you still want to lose your weight, especially if you're overweight as the first primary goal, and at least get down to like 12% or so. But you risk the chance of just looking skinny in the end, which is okay, because then you need to transition into like a fat maintenance but a muscle gain phase, which inevitably you'll gain like a little bit of fat, but if you do it right, you're not going to gain too many pounds of fat, maybe 1 pound of fat for every 5 pounds of muscle or so. So then in that phase, you would really focus on expanding the size of your upper body, the size of your lats, width of your lats, your hips, etc., etc. And that usually takes a long time. It usually takes years. I've been lifting for 20 years, okay? There are times where I traveled for prolonged periods of time, 3-4 months. Maybe I wasn't on point with my training schedule and eating schedule then, so obviously I had some small setbacks there, but I'll still work out and still be very physically active through backpacking with a very heavy backpack and doing push-ups and stuff of that sort. In Japan, when I was there, I did P90X workouts at this local park nearby. I literally just had bands in the pull-up bar and just did those workouts there way back in 2010. In India, I backpacked pretty much throughout the perimeter of the whole entire country with, I don't know, like 40, 50 pound backpack, okay? So that's obviously weightlifting as well, because you're walking a lot and it puts a lot of load on your erectors, your core, your hips as well, etc. Obviously it's not ideal. I'm not trying to advertise that as the ideal form of training, but I'm just saying I've been very physically active for basically like 20 years or so. So it doesn't happen overnight, especially the muscle maturity aspect. Fat loss is easy to do, and it's easy to do at any age, in my opinion. I've helped some of the people are here. Tim Petro is my former client. It's been a while since we trained together, and I did an interview with him, but he lost 60 pounds, okay, in like 7 or 8 months. I forgot exactly the time frame, but this was also during the peak of COVID. And he's 60 years old, and we didn't even have a gym. All I had him do was nature walks and some band workouts at home, and he was still able to lose that weight and also get off of about 6 to 7 different pharmaceutical drugs that he was on for years, but we're able to make him healthy enough to not have to be on those drugs, etc., etc. So that's how you want to be looking at aesthetic ab development. You want to look at it holistically. You know, yes, you do need to lose your body fat. Patrick, good to see you. yes, you do need to lose your body fat, obviously, but you need to do all that other stuff. You need to enhance the musculature of your physique in certain areas, depending on which areas are lacking in your body frame. And have an artistic eye, for physiques. When I look at clients' physiques, I always try to look at it from an artistic perspective. How can we mold and etch away at this person's physique and their details and really bring out visually the most aesthetically appealing body for them? So all these things are important, okay, guys? So that's it for today. If you guys have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them. But if not, I'm just going to go enjoy my weekend and relax. And remember, guys, if you are working hard, you need to be resting harder. Don't go by this like work hard, play hard mentality, okay? Try to spend the weekends resting, getting a lot of sleep so you're refreshed and ready to go next week, etc., etc. So, all right, guys, great to see everyone and have a good one, okay? Have a good weekend. Best to you guys. Bye.